Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Unplated by Sabrina Medora. Today, we are chatting with Chef Danny Lledó of Xiquet in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Danny. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we are clearly talking in what is Christmas time right now. And so we wanted to kind of focus on reflecting on the year that has been the craziest year for everyone we know and what to look forward to, as things hopefully improve in the new year. So Danny, tell us a little bit about what it was like to open up a restaurant and then have to completely change everything just weeks afterwards because of the pandemic.
Well, it was pretty crazy to start off with. Literally 1 week is actually the time frame that we had to, from the first day of open to when the restaurants decided to close, just literally the next day. It was quite a scary situation. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know how fast to go. I was getting a phone call from Talk saying, "Hey, do you want to be doing these to-go orders and this and that and the other?" And I'm like, wow, I can't believe this is actually happening. I was getting that information from my reservation system prior to actually the restaurants being closing while they were still considering the government closing DC. So, you know, what I almost didn't want to do, I was forced to do because like, well, we got to switch. And, for those people that know what it takes to like open a restaurant, if you're caught in the same position that I was, you're not ready to really throw in the towel. So you really have to like see what you have to do. You have to make harsh decisions. I had 19 employees at that moment. I had to cut down to like 4 within 2 weeks. Um, Almost, cut down to 6 immediately. And then I saw that it was just not viable to keep the other 2 based on a new business model that we just didn't have any understanding. We weren't a restaurant that was dependent on carry out or delivery, like say a 200 or 500 square restaurant that did focus on that type of business. So we didn't know how to reach out to people. We are a high-end restaurant. Like high-end restaurants don't do delivery or pickup orders because it's not the same quality food, not the same preparation. It wouldn't be presented in the same way. Part of it is experience that you can't really transmit on a to-go order, the packaging. There's so many things to figure out, and so it was definitely really challenging. And then, yeah, that's from the beginning moment. It was a nightmare for sure.
I can only imagine that sounds nightmarish. Tell me a little bit about what the original vision of Xiquet was. What were you trying to achieve? I understand that it's a small 18 seats restaurant.
So interesting enough, it started off with, now it's 18 seats because of COVID, but it started off with 30. So when we reopened back in June, we had to cut down to 5 tables essentially. But during this pandemic, we actually developed. We actually turned into something a little bit differently. We had an original vision in terms of the amount of seats and what our certain philosophy was in terms of what we were able to do for tables and what we couldn't do for tables. And then it changed. It became a lot more customized. Now 70% of our guests do a tasting menu versus a la carte. Before, maybe it was a little bit more 50-50 split or even more a la carte options because we had more people in the dining room. That's what the original, it was still always meant to be a high-end restaurant, luxury setting with precision kitchen from a wood fire cuisine. But it became a little bit different. Now if a table of 4 came in and said, "Hey, I want 3 different types of paella," I can do that for them because why shouldn't they be able to do that? Have paellas for one. And for all those Spanish restaurants out there in the world, usually it's a 2-person minimum for a paella because of, hey, you don't have a unlimited size kitchen. You have certain limitations in terms of what you're able to produce at certain aspects. So we definitely became more accommodating. We were able to get into, hey, today we have 3 tables. 1 table is completely vegetarian. Yes, let's do a 10-course vegetarian menu. So from that perspective, because of that and the development, we actually became a better restaurant in terms of the dine-in practice. So the original vision expanded into more of what we are today.
That's great. Really taking those lemons and making some lemonade out of it.
Yeah.
Speaking of paella, you are the most awarded paella chef in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes.
So tell me, how did you get involved in specializing in this one particular dish? How did you sort of make your name on it?
Well, paella is something that I grew up with in my family. My dad was a chef um, from the Valencia area, and I grew up on it. It was something we had very regularly. And then when I went to Spain, visit, my dad's side of the family, um, each aunt or uncle had a different specialty in terms of the type of paella they were good at or the type of paella that they served whenever we went over for lunch. And so it was always been part of my life. And then once I got more into the profession, there's this international competition, and the first in Los Angeles, and I won the freestyle paella that day. And it was because from there we, as a company, as well as myself, there was an opportunity because the World Championship in Valencia, where the United States was a semifinal round, and where you get 18 chefs from around the world to compete in Valencia for a total of 40 chefs, the other 22 from Spain. Out of the 22 from Spain, 12 were from the Valencian community. And it's one type of paella, the Valencian paella. So year after year, I would try after that to compete in these semifinal rounds and really hone in on my skills, understanding it to a really high level. So I've always made paella well. I was taught well by my family, my dad specifically being a chef and also from the area. But then getting into deeper into the understandings of what makes a good paella stylistically, or how to create the flavors. And quite candidly, I had to relearn how to make the Valencian paella because from the city that we're from, we always use broth to flavor with an X amount of
Sorry,
period
Danny, I'm
of
gonna stop you.
time from the ingredients, which took a little special.
Sorry, you're like broke up in that whole part about talking about the Valencian paella.
Okay.
Let's just take a moment and then let's let your screen reset and then we'll just start. You can start off right with, I had to relearn the Valencian paella. So 3, 2, go.
Yes, I had to relearn the Valencian paella. Essentially, I had to learn how to create broth at a competition versus having the broth already pre-made and making a paella deliciously that way. So that was a really interesting change, and also the wood fire element. So you know, turn it into paella to create a perfect caramelization separate on the bottom. So I actually spent years, just cooking outside, just learning how to cook with wood fire, not just paellas, but other I Texas style smoker, and I learned the elements of smoking in that perspective. So that all helped the restaurant eventually because we have a green egg smoker inside of our kitchen, which is pretty awesome. But just the element of like our rotisserie, but also making the paellas. So it's that training that I provided myself for years because of the competition and creating a whole wood fire strategy that was unique in order to create a perfect symmetry of caramelization on the bottom of the paella pan, was because of the competitions.
Right. And now help me understand, does the wood fire, is that a very specific Valencian technique for paella, or was that something that you sort of brought into the mix?
In the competition in Spain, they use wood fire. You have to use orange wood for it. The wood does create a different flavor profile. It's an extra ingredient for the food. So it brings those aromas together. It's not just because they don't want to use gas. It actually tastes better because of the flavor of the smoke goes into it. So that's a aspect. It sounds primitive that you're using wood, but because extra ingredient from the smoke, is that, but also in competition is like, hey, it actually becomes too easy. I actually have to focus more because I don't want to mess up.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so your love for paella, you went from, eating it as a child, you started doing competitions, you opened Xiquet, the pandemic hit, and now you've kind of turned to paella again as almost like a second form of business where you're teaching these classes and providing paella to different families, and now it's gone across the country. Is that right?
Yes. So interesting enough, something that I never anticipated in May with public Paella classes, and now we're doing only about 1 to 2 public classes every month, and we're offering providing companies. So we have clients that are law firms, Deloitte, associations, and where they hire us to do a team building fun event in terms of cooking paella at home, and I'm teaching that class for them. So interesting enough, that is something that developed, and right, like next week, I have 5 Paella classes. 2 are public one on a Saturday, and then we have three other ones during the week in terms of private classes, and so it's just an interesting new development. It's because when we do the classes, we also offer wine, we also have desserts. They can also buy the paella pan itself, so they can make more paella on their own, have that as a nice company gift. So it's really become something different, and it's interesting that I have a paella class this coming Friday with a company out in Colorado, and where we ship over their ingredients to them in terms of the paella kits. They had to have a short list in terms of like going to the supermarket for things that don't travel well, but the rice, the olive oil, the pan, was shipped.
So how do you translate this feeling of, fine dining hospitality through a virtual event and in someone's home? How have you sort of worked your way around that?
So you can't really transmit it to a certain degree in terms of like the dining experience, but what you can do is make the customer feel special. So from that standpoint, uh, every customer that since before the pandemic, before the beginning of the pandemic, gets a thank you card, whether they dine in with us on now or they took out orders to go, and or took a class. They get a handwritten note from from me, and saying thank you for participating. A little old-fashioned, but taking that extra step to really say thank you, and then they also get a small little gift from us as well. That everybody, if they dine in to go or there, so like those details, taking care, being very professional when you're on camera for classes. And a dear friend of mine from Deloitte, actually, that spends all day pandemic in front of Zoom calls and calls in general, and conference calls, and where helped me be able to teach the class. He was the moderator for all the classes to begin with, and that training and teaching and cooking, has made an experience where I did perform a private paella class for over 100 households, which was 400 servings of paella for one event. And on that one specifically, it wasn't interactive, where in the past, people would be able to ask me questions. So, but because I did so many of them prior, I was more thorough. I did recaps during certain stages. I was able to really hone in on becoming a good teacher of paella. And because they weren't able to ask me questions. So I have to anticipate what the questions can be and really give a very step-by-step detailed process of the class. So that is, sort of speak, my overall commitment, that you're professional, you're able to do deliveries on time, live by your word. If something wrong happens, you're able to make up for it. So still very customer stories oriented, and where the organizer of this, for example, 100-person event, definitely feels the impact. That everything was, all the deliverables were met. There were extras that they weren't expecting. Um, and the actual class was amazing. And people commented on how great the class was. So as long as you do all those steps, you can actually try to tell the customer that you're a professional, that you transmit a luxury experience, and that you care about them.
I'm really curious how you mentioned your friend from Deloitte helped you moderate those first few classes, and you learned a lot from him on how to, host those virtual experiences. Can you shed light on what specifically you learned from his technique and style that helped you?
The way I talk, to be a little bit slow and process, and sometimes, it's not just him, but also I did a class for high school baseball players, and where the same instructions for, say, a group of professionals, lawyers, is very different from high school age kids. So I think it was that class, and with the other experience, and where not everybody's the same. So even a professional, a 35-year-old with experience needs those extra steps, to make sure that what you may know as a given, may not be what everybody knows. And so that's an important aspect. The way I talk, the recaps, because some people fall behind. Some people have a better knack for it, and so that act of recapping certain stages, of the process of cooking, very important. And so even the way I'm talking to you, I want to make sure that I'm deliberate when I speak, clear, enunciate well, things like that.
Well, you're doing a great job. Anything that goes wrong, we'll just blame the Wi-Fi.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
And so my final question is, you've really had to rethink your business model in terms of your restaurant. You now have the opportunity to reach people across the country more than you would have just being a brick and mortar business owner. What's in store as you kind of try to wrap your head around 2021? Do you foresee yourself taking it back to the restaurant? Do you foresee yourself expanding even further virtually? What can customers expect?
I think a lot of that's going to depend on how the vaccine gets distributed and how soon consumer confidence starts falling back into place, and what time of year that actually happens. That's a little bit of the uncertainty. So, as of right now, we're booking these classes months in advance now. People know that, they want something still cool and they need to still connect. Maybe this company did it and you heard about it from maybe a friend of yours, and now you want to do a class like that for your company. And so I think that that's going to have to continue. So we're aggressively acting in the market nationally, trying to work with more corporate customers that at the end of the day, it's a little different dealing with a corporate customer that wants to do all the bells and whistles, and where, a smaller company that is just trying to meet their end of the year budget and make expense, and do something nice because he has to. There are different types of customers for that. And so, we are in the business of trying to survive, and, that we want to work with local ones as well as national ones, to create a brand for ourselves. What's in store for that? I'm not sure if, we're going to be another, develop an online platform to compete against Amazon. I don't know if that's in the cards for us in terms of like Spanish products, like rice and pans and classes and cheese and charcuterie and things like that. So, I think that we have to also do wine tastings. Last night I did a Cabernet Sauvignon wine tasting from California Wines for a group of customers from a company, and those are the things that we have to continue to try to be creative with, to create more of a virtual experience, not just classes, but doing wine dinners, wine tastings, cooking, baking, finding new ways to trying to transmit a luxury to go menu for home. I mean, I think that has been one of my biggest challenges because, not only you just don't have, the bandwidth to support all these new different sources of revenue where nobody's really had to think about a to-go chef's tasting menu. And now for this month, we have 3 different chef's tasting menus to go. One for the normal month, one for Christmas, one for New Year's Eve and New Year's week. And we wanted to make it special. We wanted to make it different so that the same customer that from you in December 2nd can order for you on Christmas, and it can also order from you on New Year's Eve if it chooses to dine at home. That's hard, because that you can do a better job if they came into the restaurant. And so I think the to-go orders is something that we're going to continue developing, even post the pandemic, because it's going to be a permanent new revenue for people that maybe they just don't want to go out there. And yes, they want to support you and order your food. So I don't think it's just going to be classes. I think the challenge for luxury dining is to, because we were forced to create a dining experience at home for people, that now we're going to, have to, want to continue because we found a way to make it work.
I think that's great. And for what it's worth, if you do start a website that sells charcuterie and cheeses and paella boards and things like that, I will be your #1 fan and customer. Sign me right up. Send me my charcuterie boards, please. I love that idea. And, I think the idea of wine pairings and tastings, I just think that more people are open to creating a better experience of dining at home now. And this is such a beautiful opportunity for chefs to kind of lead the way.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. We acknowledge all of your hard work, and we're so grateful to you and your team for doing what you do. It's unbelievably difficult. And so the fact that you are, keep going, and not only that, but innovating instead of just surviving, I think really kudos to you and your whole team.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity to share my story. And I wish you the best in these holidays to you and your family.
Thank you. The same to you. Take care.